Welcome to another edition of Professor Messer's free CompTIA A+ certification training course. And this module, we're going to talk about I/O connections on a motherboard. These are the input-output connections that we might expect to see on a normal motherboard. This comes from the CompTIA Exam Objectives 220-601, Section 1.1, where we're expected to know and identify what these different motherboard characteristics are for these different integrated components. And we're going to step through every single one of these and a little bit more. What we're going to talk about specifically are audio connections, video connections, USB, serial. These are the things you might expect to see on the back of a motherboard that you're plugging into. Other things that are relatively new, like FireWire, we'll also talk about. And then some standby, some things we sometimes on the newer motherboards don't see anymore are things like parallel ports, network interface cards, and modems. So let's start with this integrated input-output and where we expect to see these. This is the back of my motherboard. You can see a lot of different connectors there. What you want to be able to do for the A+ exam is be able to know exactly what each one of these different devices are just by looking at it. Immediately, I should know exactly what that port does. I should know what that port is. I should know what this port does. And I should be able to look at the back of any motherboard. And this is a good thing to try with your system. You should be able to turn it around and know exactly what each one of those different ports does. Here's two ports you're going to find on some legacy systems. You really don't see these too much on the newer systems. The newer ones tend to use USB connections, but you'll find these keyboard and mouse connections. And one thing you notice is that they've got colors associated with them. These are standardized colors, and they come from something called the PC System Design Guide. And this was created by Intel and Microsoft so that they could create motherboards and systems that all had similar connections. The colors were connected. So you'd see a green connection. You'd look around for a cable that had a green connection at the bottom of that one, and you know it plugged into that. If you had a red cable, there might be a red connector on the PC. And so this was really designed for the consumer market, but it certainly applies across the board. It helps wherever you are. If you see a purple connection, this is the one at the bottom, that's related to the keyboard. And so at the end of your keyboard cable, you'll probably have also a purple connection. And that purple connection is a 6-pin, what we call a mini DIN. You can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pins here, and it's a mini DIN. And the DIN stands for this institute that named it. And it's in German, so we'll just call it a mini DIN here in the United States in English. When you see the mouse ports, it looks exactly the same as the keyboard port, except it's colored differently. It's green, and it's also a 6-pin mini DIN. In fact, you can take the mouse and plug it into the keyboard port, and you can take the keyboard and plug it into the mouse port. Sometimes that causes problems. You may find your keyboard isn't working or your mouse isn't working, and that's because you may have plugged them into the wrong place. Prior to this, there were no colors on these connections, and you really sometimes weren't exactly sure if it was dark and the connectors are in the back of the computer. You sometimes will try it one way, see if you've got it right, and you switch it around to see if it will work the other way. As I mentioned, these days, most of these keyboard mouse connections are provided via USB, so you don't see very many of these types of connectors on newer motherboards. The other ports you'll see on the back of a motherboard are audio ports, and these are these 3.5 millimeter, we call them TRS plugs. You don't often hear them referred to as that. That stands for tip, ring, and sleeve. You'll hear them as audio jacks. That's a good example of how you might hear them. The color standard here is also in that PC design guide, but it's not always followed. So you can't always expect the green port to be a green port, have the exact same function on another motherboard. So you'll see that next to the case of these audio ports on this motherboard, there is a little bit of text next to them. And that helps unless you're working on a motherboard and it's in the back of a wall and there's no light. You'll find that you're going around with the flashlight a lot just so you can figure out what port is labeled what on the back of that motherboard. Video ports these days look a little bit different. Most of us are used to these older style VGA ports. Almost every computer has a VGA port on the back of it. And the VGA stands for Video Graphics Array. It's a type of port called a DE15, and that's from these D standard ports. The E refers to the size of that D shelled port, and it has 15 pins in it, and that's where the 15 comes from. With the newer motherboards and newer systems, you'll see these DVI connectors, these digital video interface connectors. You can see they look a lot different. They're connectors that have a lot of other functions associated with them. They'll send information both as analog and video signals, and oftentimes we'll just refer to it as a DVI connector. We mentioned earlier USB is often used today for keyboard and mice, and this is an example of how USB might look. Some of our older motherboards might only have 1 or 2 USB ports on it. The newer motherboards might have anywhere from 6 to 8 to 10 different USB slots on it. These are what we call Type A slots on a USB connector. There's all kinds of different USB connections, but on motherboards, which is what we're talking about here, almost always we see this Type A slot connected to it. And you may even see this USB symbol right next to the ports on the motherboard, and you'll know that's where the USB ports go to. On some older motherboards, you'll see things like serial ports, and this is really legacy hardware. Today, the universal serial bus, the USB, has really taken the place of the older style and slower serial ports, but you still see them around on the back of systems. They can come in this 9-pin type that I've identified here. Some older systems, really old systems, might have a 25-pin serial port on the back of it. You don't see many of those anymore. The size is very similar to a VGA port. It looks almost exactly the same size as a VGA port, but notice that it only has 9 pins inside of it, and unlike a VGA port, this is male, has the pin sticking out of it. A VGA port, a video port on the back of a computer, is female. So that's one way you can tell immediately without having to even count the number of pins, the type of connection that it might be. When we look at the communication these days, you see a lot of FireWire ports. We refer to them as FireWire ports, but FireWire is a term that was trademarked by Apple. So a lot of non-Apple systems won't have the word FireWire on them. You'll see it replaced with the term IEEE 1394, which is the IEEE specification for this type of port. And so if you're looking for a cable, a FireWire cable, you'll see them identified sometimes as an IEEE 1394 cable. That's what it really is. It's exactly the same. It will work on an Apple FireWire. It will work on a 1394. It's exactly the same specification. You'll see there's different speeds for FireWire and different connections on some older systems and systems that will allow to have larger ports. You'll see this larger 1394 port on it. My laptop has a FireWire port on it, and it's this smaller 4-pin connection that's on there. They both work exactly the same at the same throughput. There's different kinds of FireWire running at 400 and 800 megabit per second, but in this case, it just happened to have a different type of port connected to it. Parallel ports are used very often to plug printers in, and in the past we've even used it as a way to transfer information back and forth to a system. These are 25-pin connections. They're very long, and they're this red magenta color. So you'll see it these days on the motherboards following that specification. It's very easy to see them because they're very big. They really didn't come in smaller sizes. Very much legacy use because printers and other devices that would use a parallel port today are now USB based. You just use a USB printer instead of using a parallel cable and plugging it into a parallel port. So you won't see very many of those ports available on newer systems. What you will see on newer systems are network connections, especially Ethernet connections on systems. And this happens to be an Ethernet connection, a network interface card, or a NIC card, or a NIC connection. Even though it's redundant to say NIC card, you'll hear it referred to that way. And this happens to be on the back of my motherboard, an Ethernet connection running at 10, 100, or 1000 megabit per second. We sometimes will call that a gigabit connection. It's what we'll call an RJ45, a registered jack. Nobody calls it registered jack. They'll just refer to it as an RJ45 connection. And there are 8 pins inside of this. It's kind of wide. At first glance, it looks like it could even be for telephone connection, but it's a little bit wider than that. And if we counted the number of pins in here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, there's 8 different connections in there, which is a little different than one used for a modem or telephone. In fact, the modem and telephone, they're a little smaller. Here's one side by side. The modem connection uses a telephone port that's an RJ11, and it only has 4 pins inside of it that are used at any particular time. Now, on this connection, in this picture, there's right next to it on the right side, this is a network connection. You can see it's a little bit larger, but sometimes if you're not looking very closely, you'll plug a modem connection into the network interface port, and you'll notice the modem's not working, and that may be a reason why, because it'll fit in there, but it certainly won't work very well. In review, these are the types of interfaces that we'll see on the back of a motherboard. Not only the audio and video connections, but some of the newer USB and FireWire connections. The serial and parallel ports we don't see very much anymore, but you'll see network interface cards, sometimes multiple network interface cards on the back of servers, and the modem connections, sometimes optionally we'll see them on the laptop systems that you'll have around these days. For more A+ certification training videos, for our message boards, and to look at our study guides, feel free to visit our website at freeaplus.com.